Shark Cat, without doubt, the action boat of the 80s.
To hop into a Shark Cat, especially if you haven't been in one before, it's the most wonderful feeling out to hear the response of the two motors on the back. Give it to it, they get straight away up on the plane, and you see that people's eyes just open up and they're holding on, expecting to hit hard. You know, I get on a bar and just waves breaking under you, which if you do it with a mono, you're gone. And then we'd just gun it off it, and sometimes it'd cavitate a bit. We'd have to pull the throttle back, then you'd give it again when you knew it was in. It would just take off and nearly fly through the air and land always stern first. The cat gets the air underneath the furling, especially running into the wind, and it throws the water from the spray from the front. It throws it between the two hulls. It's water and air, and that's what gives you your very, very soft landing. You're not landing on solid water, which has got a lot of power in solid water. And it was just a wonderful feeling. I used to love being in the boat. I wasn't the first person to invent a cat, but it was most probably the first person anywhere that made them successful speedboats. Well, it started way back, I think my father-in-law was retiring. This is going back into the 60s. Had me going around looking for a boat. He was a very keen fisherman. And so I finally said to my wife, I'm going to make him a boat for Christmas. And I used to watch the quick cats going in and out of the surf at Cura. I decided to build two hulls and put a square box on it. And it turned out very good. My father-in-law rejected it at first, but then when we put it in the water, being a good father-in-law, he brought his little outboard up and went out, and he said, "This is great." My daughter saw me building it under the house, and she said, "Dad, it looks like a tippy willy." One day my trawler broke down. I had a trawler and used to do it with, and a mate said to us, "I've got an outboard here." He said, "What about we put it on and we take it out?" Oh, so I'm not too sure. I'd never been in a speedboat. And anyway, we put it in and we went out in it, and I realised how easy it was to do the shark run in it. Anyway, we went out and we found out we can pull the nets in easier, and it was so much quicker. It used to take me 2.5 hours to steam at 8 knots back from Coolangatta back to the Gold Coast, and I found out I could do it most probably in 40 minutes. It didn't have a proper front on it, so I built a proper front on it, and I was using that all the time, but I realised it wasn't strong enough, as it's only built out of 1/4-inch marine ply. So I decided I'd find out how to build a glass boat. And I went into a factory down the coast and wanted to have a look at them doing the glassing, and he told me if I didn't get out he was going to boot me out because it was a closed industry. But I found out off other people how it was done, so I built a mould under my house out of masonite, and I built a boat in it. And that was the first Shark Cat that I didn't call it a Shark Cat, but everyone would say to me, "Oh, here comes the Shark Cat in." So I decided that's what I'd call it. It wasn't right, and you know, it was a bit wet and things like that, so I finished up cutting the mould up about 6 times to get the right shape. And I built one and I was very happy with it. And I had no intentions of going into it, but Harbours Marine wanted a boat for survey work, and they could see what I could do in and out the surf. And they asked me would I build them one. And I told them I'd lend them the mould to build one for themselves if they wanted to. They said, "No, you're going to build it." The first one was a Tippy Willy, which was 12 foot long. Then the next one was a 17, which I went into. And then I went from there to a 23 foot, but I liked the 20 foot myself for on the bar and manoeuvrability, and that's so I used to put a blank in the 23 and build that. My customers virtually started off with, the first one was the Harbours Marine for survey work, and then it went to Sea Rescue, Coast Guards. I was the first training leader for them, and then it then went to the abalone industry. They're very, very big industry there, and I think nearly half the boats still in the industry today are shark cats, and this is going back 40 odd years ago, and then the police went into them, and also the police, the fisheries and that all went into them and just sell them. I sold a few cats to America, but they were ordering them all grey, and I was very suspicious while they were all grey, and I think they were going into the drug trades between Cuba and the other states there. The biggest problem that most people make when they build a cat, they don't make them full enough in the front, and also they don't make their chines come up. Like what I mean, I've seen so many boats that they've been built even in Australia and especially overseas, that when they go into a sea, you've got to have a boat that wants to lift out of the water, but most of them make them fairly sharp, and all they want to do is go into the wave. Whereas the cat's got like a ski in the front. It's got 3-inch chine, 2 to 3 inch chines either side, and it goes up. So as soon as it goes into wave, it wants to lift. And I decided to put a plank on the bottom of them that I saw that the mono hulls with a plank were getting up and going very, very fast. And so I put a plank, quite a big plank, below my boat, and I just filled it all in. And yes, it was a lot faster, but it was a lot harder running. I also did another thing which a lot of people don't do. I flared me bows. The simple reason, when I went into a wave and the wave went to come up, the flare on the outside would throw the water clear and actually give you a lot more lift. And none of the cat builders today have got that flare on the front compared to with what I had then. I finished up having 42 men working for me, and I couldn't keep up with the orders from them. If you ordered a cat, you had to wait 9 months for them when I was building them, and yet we were building two a week. I never wore shoes. I never wore shoes while I was fiberglassing even. Turning is you've got to get used to with a shark cat. They lay out on turns. They don't go round even square, they lay out. Whereas normal boat lays in and you get used to it. If you haven't been in one before, when it starts to lay out, you have that feeling, but you know, once you're used to it, it's just no worries. It's not going to go too far. The trim is very secret in driving a cat. When I say the trim is, say that the seas are coming on your port side, they're coming in that side, you've got to trim the port side motor up, and then you've got to trim your starboard side motor down a bit. Outboards lift the stern opposite to what you're doing. If you lift your port side motor up, you are virtually lifting your starboard bow up, and you've got to get used to that. Like what I mean, it's just the opposite. The best way to set up a shark pat is to have it heavier at the back than the front. I then started to race them, and I can remember going down to Sydney for the first race, and so I said to me mate Basil, that what about I go and do the shark run, you meet me at Tweed Heads, we'll put a boat on the trailer and go to Sydney and go into Sydney, the Newcastle Ocean race. He said okay, so that's what we did, and we got down there. I can remember people coming and looking at my boat and laughing, and all these needle nose boats and all low things were there, and I had even our shark net still in it and some jaws out of a shark and that, and the smell of it and the fins and that, and they just laughed at me. But the Sydney to Newcastle was a very rough race. And it was an area I knew as I grew up in Newcastle, prawning all along that coast, and I virtually got to Newcastle that much ahead, most probably an hour ahead of any other boat in my class. And there's only the big boats that just beat me there, and I'm talking about the 36 footers with 1,000 horsepower in. Oh, I built a lot of race boats. I had the 4 outboards on the back of my racing boat, Sharky's Cat it was known as, and everyone used to call me Sharky Harris, and we could do 85, 90 mile an hour with it. I won the world title in 1980 with that, and I really, I just ran away with the title. And with a mate, Tony Lowe from Melbourne, we built a 32-foot VDO. He put 4 200s on it. We won the Pacific race, which was from Cairns to Southport in that one too. There was also Abergrabber. It was another workboat, which was a bloke with an abalone licence working out of Malakuta, and he used to race it, take the windscreen off, and he had a very good mechanic, and I'm a bit suspicious of him when he used to beat me sometimes, that he was tickling the motor up a bit and to get that few extra horsepower out of it. Johnny Haynes and Haynes Hunter even give me a lot of advice on boats, and I realised by racing them that I found out where I can make them light to make them perform, and yet make them strong to take all the seas that were available. Oh, it makes me feel very good to see them going around. They're a bit different than what I did. Some of the bottoms of the 18 is still the same, hasn't altered. The tops are much more refined and they look very nice. They've certainly put a lot more work into the boats, but they're charging a lot more than what I charge too, like to put this, to make them look like beautiful little cruise boats. I'm one of those very lucky blokes. I met my wife and married her very quickly. I wasn't going to let her get away, and we've been married 53 years, and I'm a very, very lucky man for the wife I've got. We had 3 children, and I'd get up early in the morning and go to work at 4 and 5 o'clock, change the baby's nappy, give it to her and say goodbye, and she wouldn't see me till 7 o'clock at night time. And she's always saying, I never see you, I never see you. I'm a bit of a workaholic, she thinks, and that's why I think I really sold it in the first place, the shark cat business. I still today draw boats, and mainly fishing boats, trawlers and things like that. Well, I only know about boats, I haven't had another job in all my life except with boats, and I just love boats. When I first met my wife, I've got a bent nose, and she said, "You've got a bent nose?" I said, "Yeah, that's from kissing girls." And she said, "What?" She said, "Do you like kissing?" "Oh yes," I said, "I like doing that." And anyway, 30 years later, we went to a Harris reunion, and there's 14 in Dad's family, and there's 13 in my mother's family. And we went to a reunion at Singleton. And it had to be in the showground because 400 Harrises turned up. The first thing she said to me, "Do all the Harrises love kissing girls?" I said, "Oh yes." They all had bent noses.